I grew up on a 26-acre horse farm in the middle of rural Ohio. Looking back, I was always a bit of a loner. While other kids hung out with friends or played sports, I was happiest with my nose buried in a book. Relationships were never my strong suit. I can count the number of girlfriends I had on one hand, and honestly, middle school relationships hardly count. I didn't put much effort into connecting with people outside of a handful of close friends. My parents split up when I was still a kid. After the divorce, I lived with Mom and saw Dad every other weekend. That setup left its mark on me. I grew up without much of an idea of what a healthy relationship was supposed to look like, and I never really got enough time with Dad to learn from him or have him as a consistent role model. Mom went through a series of boyfriends after the divorce, and some of them were downright terrible. One of them thought it was fine to backhand me clear across the room when I was only 10, or whip us with a belt if things weren't up to his standards. Another guy had this sick habit of using glue traps for mice in the garage. He'd make my brother and me stand there and watch while he cut the mice off the traps, by cutting their legs off. He'd toss the poor, legless creatures, still alive, into the trash. Real stand-up guy, huh? I figured out early on that the safest thing to do was to stay quiet and act agreeable. Speaking up or showing any kind of resistance usually just earned me more punishment. Over time, that attitude turned into a toxic habit of just grinning and bearing it, swallowing my feelings, and putting up with mistreatment from people. Books became my escape. I devoured them. My bedroom was crammed with over 1,000 books, double-stacked on 5 shelves. When I wasn't buried in a story during the cold months, I'd be outside as soon as my chores were done. I'd find spots to read out in the woods, the hayfields, or even the old cemetery across from our property. It was peaceful, but honestly, it probably wasn't the healthiest way to spend so much of my time. Now, through therapy, I've come to understand how that upbringing shaped me. It left me vulnerable, primed to accept mistreatment in relationships because I didn't know better and didn't think I deserved better. Those survival skills I learned as a kid, keeping my head down and tolerating the worst, set me up for staying with people who didn't treat me right. That's how things played out with Elle. We met in our mid-teens, of all places, at a church lock-in that neither of us even wanted to be at. Funny how that works. She had this quirky, mid-2000s vibe, wrote weird poetry, shouted random stuff like spork, for laughs, you know the type. She had curly hair and a kind of offbeat charm. The first thing she did was challenge me to an air hockey game. That's where it all started. From that night on, we were pretty much inseparable. We dated exclusively for 7 years, finishing high school together and heading to the same local state college on the same scholarship. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but I just figured that was part of being in a relationship. But Elle, well, she was unpredictable. She tried to isolate me from the few friends I had, claiming they were jealous of her. Taking all my time. She'd cry over the tiniest things, lash out at me physically when she was angry, and constantly demanded affection and validation. And she wasn't shy about seeking attention from others when she felt she wasn't getting enough from me. I put up with it all because she was my first real girlfriend. She had a way of spinning her bad behavior to make it seem like I just didn't understand. I'd convince myself she was just being emotional or irrational and stick around, hoping things would go back to normal. College brought out even more red flags. Within months, she was spending way too much time with other guys in our dorm. I'd ask her if we were okay, and she'd assure me everything was fine. Then later that same night, I'd find her sitting on some guy's lap in his room. I caught her making out with random guys more than once, and her excuses never really added up. Finally, I confronted her. After I laid everything out and told her I'd leave if she didn't tell me the truth, she confessed. She'd fooled around with another guy, describing every detail, no less. She said she was obsessed with him because, get this, he looks like the guy from Napoleon Dynamite and is just really hot. I mean, seriously? I should have walked away right then and there, but we'd been together for almost 5 years by then. I convinced myself we could work it out and fix things. I confronted the guy she'd been involved with, and after that, she cut him off completely. things actually improved for a little while. During my junior year of college, I landed a decent job with a local construction company. Over the next 6 months, I managed to save up enough for a down payment on a house. This was back in 2008, in an older steel town where housing prices had hit rock bottom. I sat down with Elle, and we decided it was a smart move to buy a house close to our school. It felt like the start of a real life together, even as we were still finishing college. Not long after we moved in, we got engaged. At the time, I thought getting her out of that co-ed dorm would solve the cheating issues, and honestly it seemed to work, for a while anyway. Life felt like it was finally coming together. For a few years things were good. Elle got a job selling books, then decided to pursue graduate school. Well, several graduate programs actually. She started 4 different ones but quit each time, saying they weren't the right fit. I covered the costs for the programs that didn't come with scholarships or loans, supporting her through all those shifts and decisions. We got a dog and some cats, and I kept plugging away at my construction job. I hated my boss, but the paycheck kept the lights on. We got married in 2010, just after turning 23. Let me tell you something, kids don't get married that young. At that age, you don't really understand what makes a good relationship. Back then, I thought we had the good life. My mornings started early with a kiss for Elle before heading to work. My job was demanding, a mix of drafting, estimating, and physical labor on job sites, but it felt normal. I'd come home, let the dog out, and listen to Elle talk about her day. Complaining about my own day wasn't really an option. She'd say I wasn't manly enough, and that it added to her stress. So, I just cook dinner, mow the lawn, and keep things moving. That was life, rinse and repeat. I figured it was typical, maybe even better than average. The cracks really started to show when Elle got a new job at a local energy company doing mapping. For the first time, she was earning more than minimum wage. Not long after, her boss's boss took a special interest in her. Within a few months she was promoted to a process assistant position in a larger city about 2 hours away. Around the same time, she started having an emotional affair with that same boss, which later turned physical. The guy was 30 years older than her, recently separated, and living in his mom's basement. I still can't make sense of what she saw in him. I noticed she was pulling away from me more than usual, but I chalked it up to the stress of a demanding job and the long commute. I tried harder, surprising her with gifts, doing sweet gestures, but nothing seemed to make a difference. I just told myself she needed time to adjust, and that things would even out. In January 2013, we decided to move to Cleveland to cut down her commute. I found a new job that was a big step up, and we scored a great place for less than market value. For a moment, it felt like everything was back on track. Sure, she worked late a lot, but that's corporate life, right? She got a raise for her excellent performance, and started making new friends at work, coming out of her shell socially. But then, the late nights started to pile up. She'd go out drinking with coworkers, coming home completely wasted. That led to plenty of fights. Eventually, we settled into a kind of routine where we barely talked, and when we did, it was just about surface-level stuff. In December 2014, we visited her parents in Texas. The trip was great, and it felt like we'd rediscovered something we'd been missing. It hit me hard how messed up things had gotten between us. When we got back, I sat her down and told her how much I'd enjoyed our time together, how I wanted to build on that and improve our relationship. I was feeling hopeful, like we could really turn things around. Her reaction floored me. She froze, stared at me with this panicked look, and then screamed. Not just yelled, she screamed. She ran to the basement, and when I followed her, trying to figure out what had just happened, she accused me of cornering her. I backed off, completely confused, and through tears she told me she didn't deserve love. I tried to understand what was going on, but she shut down. We ended up in separate rooms to cool off. The next day, when I brought it up again, she flat out denied the entire thing. She claimed none of it had happened, that we hadn't even talked the day before, and said if I mentioned it again, she'd leave. That's when my suspicions started to grow. I didn't jump straight to thinking she was cheating, though. I figured it was just her insecurities ramping up. She'd always been insecure, but nothing like this. After that whole blow-up, I came to a decision that my teenage self might have been right all along. Having a roommate who occasionally cracked a joke and sometimes slept with me was probably the best I'd ever get in a relationship. Divorce wasn't something I wanted to consider. Growing up, I'd seen how it had wrecked my mom's life, and I just couldn't imagine going through that. So, I decided I'd find a way to make it work, no matter what. Elle's staying out late, drinking, and random outbursts didn't let up. I made a conscious choice to keep my feelings to myself unless she asked, which, let's be honest, wasn't going to happen. Instead, I focused on myself. I decided I'd try to be a better, more interesting partner. I started building a home gym and getting serious about working out. I picked up backpacking and woodworking, stuff I'd always been curious about but never made time for. Around then, Elle had told me I wasn't interesting enough for her, that I didn't have any hobbies. I took her at her word, thinking this was the solution instead of addressing our deeper issues. To be fair, these hobbies turned out to be one of the few good things to come out of that relationship. I'm still in great shape, and I've gained some solid skills through woodworking and turning. D-Day came in April 2015. Elle stumbled home late one night, absolutely trashed. To this day, I'm amazed she even made it back. She threw up several times while I held her hair, then passed out on the bathroom floor. She was so drunk her breathing was irregular, and I honestly thought I might have to call an ambulance. I sat there for a while, just keeping an eye on her. Her phone was lying next to her, buzzing with incoming texts. At first, I ignored them, figuring it was someone checking to see if she got home okay. Eventually, I picked it up, used her thumbprint to unlock it, and opened the messages. The texts were all from her boss. One of the most recent ones said something like, "You only went home because you're mad I made you stop. We can't do it in the office anymore. F will catch us." My stomach dropped. In that instant, everything clicked, and I realized what had been going on. I couldn't believe how blind I'd been for the last few years. Looking back, I feel like an idiot for not putting the pieces together sooner. Sure, we'd grown distant, but I'd never even considered cheating as a possibility. I figured if I wasn't doing it, she wouldn't either. I started scrolling through their entire message thread. It had been going on for a while, though it was hard to tell when it crossed the line from a friendly work relationship to an emotional affair, and then to something physical. One message from earlier that same night stood out, right between pictures she'd sent him from the bar. They were making plans to meet up again in a week. I didn't confront her right away. I knew if I did, she'd flip the narrative and accuse me of snooping or misinterpreting things. She'd already planted the idea that I had a terrible memory, which I'm pretty sure now was just a way to gaslight me and cover her tracks. Instead, I went out the next day and bought a voice recorder. I spent some time testing it, figuring out the best spot to hide it in her car, and checking how long it could record. Meanwhile, I scoped out the place where they planned to meet. The night before their meetup, she told me she had to head to another town for work and wouldn't be home until late. I told her it was fine and to take her time. Inside, I was a ball of nerves, but I kept it together well enough to avoid raising any suspicion. The next evening, around 6 p.m., I drove to a spot near the bar where they were meeting. Sure enough, there they were, in her car, pawing at each other and making out. I didn't confront them. I just drove home, had a few shots, and cried. She came home later that night, all bubbly, talking about how great her work meeting had gone. She even thanked me for being so understanding. I said nothing, just made us dinner like it was any other night. Once she went to bed, I grabbed the voice recorder and listened to what I'd captured. It was brutal. She'd been begging him to take her back to their office to sleep together, sounding completely unhinged in her desperation. It didn't even sound like the same person I knew. I sat with all this, trying to figure out what to do, and eventually went in to wake her up. I told her we needed to talk. "Are you cheating on me?" I asked. She denied it immediately. I pressed further, asking her about the bar. She claimed she didn't even know the place. I told her I'd been there and seen some interesting things. That's when she flipped the script, accusing me of following her. "Is there a tracker in my car?" she demanded. "You have to tell me. I'm going to have a panic attack. You can't just track me." It was insane. I told her I'd read her texts and seen her messages with her boss. She grabbed her phone to show me the texts were gone, like that would somehow prove her innocence. Looking back, the whole thing was so crazy it almost doesn't feel real. Eventually, Elle admitted to the affair. She confessed that she'd been seeing S for a while, claimed it had only happened a few times, and then hit me with the kicker: if I made her stop seeing him, she wouldn't love me anymore. And somehow, that worked on me. I didn't have much self-confidence back then. I hated the idea of divorce, and honestly, I thought splitting bills with someone was better than being alone. So I stayed. For months, that's how it went. She'd meet up with him, I'd try to talk her out of it, and the cycle repeated. There were ridiculous moments during this time. S apparently had other girlfriends, and Elle got jealous of them. One night she came home sobbing. I hugged her while she cried, telling me she thought S was breaking up with her for someone else. I just froze. Inside, I didn't feel anything but a twisted sense of humor about it, like an internal eye roll. To this day, I can't figure out why I stayed after that. And, of course, she kept seeing him. Around then, she also started having one-night stands with random guys. I found out about a few over the years and suspect there were more I didn't know about. Eventually, the stress of it all caught up with me, and I developed a full-blown panic disorder. That's when I finally decided I couldn't take it anymore. I gave her the voice recorder I'd used earlier and told her she had to record herself breaking things off with S or I was leaving. She cried but agreed. The next day, she did it. When S found out I knew, he panicked. I got to watch the texts roll in on Elle's new Apple Watch, which she hadn't realized synced messages even after deleting them from her phone. Things calmed down a bit after that, and we went to one marriage counseling session. Elle only agreed to go on the condition that I didn't bring up her infidelity during the session. The counselor spent the entire time telling me I was smothering Elle by wanting to check her phone or know where she was. I only started doing that after the cheating, but whatever. We never went back. That was 2015 to 2016. Afterward, we stayed together, but about twice a year, I'd discover some new affair. There was the time she got drunk and performed oral on a coworker in a bathroom. Another time, on a work trip out of state, she started texting a guy and embarked on the weirdest emotional affair I've ever heard of. Half his messages were about how his grandma used to wipe his butt until his teens, and he liked it. At some point, I just got used to the pain. It became almost like a game between us. I'd find out, she'd figure out how I found out, and then swear to stop seeing or talking to whoever it was. She'd disconnect her Apple Watch, start using a different car, or find other ways to hide it. Looking back, I don't know how I lived like that. I checked out emotionally, but ironically, we'd still fight about how I wasn't invested enough in the relationship. The breaking point came when I got a message out of the blue from a woman named N, the wife of one of Elle's coworkers. She'd caught her husband and Elle texting and sending snaps. N sent me screenshots, and I'll never forget reading them. Elle was saying things like, "I should have done you the first time I saw you," and setting up meetings. Seeing it in black and white was like a slap in the face. It made me realize that this wasn't just a tendency to stray or repeated mistakes. This was who Elle was. I know it sounds dumb, but when you're in a relationship like that, you make excuses for one thing, and it gets easier to excuse the next. I'd gotten to the point where I was excusing everything. When I confronted Elle with the screenshots, her first reaction wasn't guilt or remorse. She was annoyed that the guy hadn't hidden it better from his wife. That blew my mind. Meanwhile, Anne was devastated. She had 2 kids, and her husband's actions were tearing their family apart. Elle, on the other hand, was more upset about the guy being too dumb to handle this sort of relationship, and said something about how there was a code of conduct for cheaters that he wasn't following. That was it for me. It was like I finally woke up after 6 years of affairs and a decade of general abuse. I moved into the basement, sleeping on an air mattress next to my gym, and started drafting dissolution papers. I figured if it didn't work, I'd hire an attorney and go for a full divorce. I went full gray rock on Elle, barely talking to her, even though we were in the same house. That's when she started love-bombing me in her own, bizarre way. One time, I came home from work to find she'd bought a lamp for the basement and set it up next to my air mattress. Probably the sweetest thing she ever did for me, which says a lot. A few days after everything came to light, I was in the kitchen grabbing a drink while Elle was working from home. She didn't hear me come in, and I caught her on the couch, talking to someone on speakerphone. It was S, still her boss, still the guy all this started with. I heard him ask if she was alone, and she said yes. My first thought was, really? Right now? While I'm literally preparing dissolution papers in the same house? I couldn't believe it. Curiosity got the better of me, so I crept closer to listen. S was rambling about how he'd never done it in a car going through an automated car wash and thought that would be fun. I just stood there stunned. Where does she find these guys? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked right behind her on the couch and yelled, "Hi S. Nice hearing from you." Elle jumped so hard she nearly fell off the couch, and S immediately hung up. I laughed, grabbed my shoes, and started putting them on. Elle shouted, "That was rude." I just laughed again as I reached for my coat. She asked, "Where are you going?" I said, "Out." Something about the way I said it must have clicked for her. She finally realized we were done. We had been done. Now I was just wrapping it up. She ran up and tried to block the door. I told her to move, but she just smiled, this weird little grin like she still thought it was all a game. Like physically standing in my way was going to magically make me stay. I was done playing. I grabbed her by the shoulders, picked her up, moved her a few feet to the side, and set her down gently. Then I told her, straight-faced, "If you try to keep me here, I will take you apart. I'm not playing anymore." I'd never been violent with her, not once, but all the anger I'd been burying for years was simmering right there under the surface. That was the closest I ever came. I walked out, got in my car, and drove to one of my favorite bars to hang out with friends I'd been making over the last few years. That night I texted her, "I know you have a work trip next week. When you get back, you're not welcome in the house anymore." Lucky for me, she didn't come back. She moved in with some guy she'd been seeing down there, a guy who was unemployed and living in his brother's dining room. The gems she found. Her cheating life was like a regular treasure hunt, only all the prizes were broken. After that, I only saw her a couple of times. She signed the paperwork I sent her with barely any changes. I made it clear that if she gave me trouble, I'd tell her company about the relationship she'd had with her boss. That got me the house, my car, and less than half of the $20,000 in credit card debt she'd racked up without my knowledge. None of my retirement accounts got touched, which felt like a small miracle. She came back to Ohio in December 2019 to sign the papers and brought her new guy with her. The whole thing was as awkward as you'd expect. He seemed to think I was the abusive one and was there to protect her in case I got violent. I didn't bother telling him about the cheating. I figured he already knew, considering he was probably one of the guys she cheated with. The only other time I saw her was when she came back to get her stuff from the house. A few months had passed. As she packed, she told me she'd moved into a new apartment, but new guy had moved in with her without even asking. She said she only realized it was happening when he showed up during her move and set an urn with his dad's ashes on her table. She gave me this strange, pleading look, like she wanted my help. I just laughed. After the divorce, I didn't see her again. Within a week, life took a sharp turn for the better. I got cold approached by a girl at a concert and got her number, then again at a local event. Within a month, I was dating 4 different people, all of them better than Elle in every imaginable way. My buddy joked that I had that fresh on the market vibe. Honestly, I was just happy for the first time in years, and I think that made it easy to attract people. Eventually, I slowed down on the dating spree. I had a few girlfriends here and there, but mostly I doubled down on taking care of myself. My workouts became a priority. I traveled to Peru and hiked the Cordillera Blanca mountains, almost getting stuck there when COVID hit. I even dug into my ancestry after doing a 23andMe test and discovered a quirky little utopian commune founded by someone with my last name. It's mostly historical buildings now, but it was fascinating to learn about. Elle tried to stay in contact over the years, mostly for nonsense reasons. Occasionally it was something important, but usually it was just her finding excuses to keep me in her orbit. I ignored it, though I did get some hilarious updates. Like how her new guy started, fake proposing, to her multiple times a week, and it freaked her out. Or when she texted me complaining about taxes and said she was going to marry him for tax benefits. When she found out I was seeing someone and got engaged, she sent a hand-painted congratulations card to the house, which went straight into the trash. Apparently, her new guy was recently diagnosed with MS. I don't see Elle suddenly discovering a nurturing side to take care of someone 10 years older with a serious neurological condition. That's not who she is. In August 2020, I met my wife, C. She's incredible. She'd just come out of a bad marriage to a guy who was eerily similar to Elle. We hit it off instantly. I still remember the moment it clicked. I was talking with a buddy and said, "I'm just looking for someone normal." She overheard me and gave me this look, like, "Me too." We've been inseparable ever since. We got married this past September after 2 amazing years of dating. And you know what? We've never even had a fight in the last year. She takes care of me, I take care of her, and we talk every single day. It's always good. It's tough to describe, but I know she's the one. Life now feels like a whole new chapter. When I look back, I wonder how I stayed for so long in a situation that was so miserable. Half my life wasted on someone who couldn't care less about me. And yet, when I finally let go, it was so easy to find someone who was everything I ever wanted. If you're reading this and stuck in a bad relationship, wondering what to do, I get it. You tell yourself it's not on purpose, that they can't really mean to hurt you. You excuse things you never thought you would. You shrink yourself down, becoming someone you don't recognize. But let me tell you, it's not worth it. Whatever leads to someone cheating once will lead to it happening again, and again after that. Cheaters tell themselves whatever they need to in order to feel okay about their actions. They'll justify it to themselves and to you. And you'll be stuck, wondering what they're doing every time they're not with you. You deserve better than that. So leave. Cut your losses. Do whatever you need to do to break free. I let my hang-ups about divorce and my low self-confidence keep me stuck way longer than I should have. Nothing about those years helped me grow. The only person who can pull you out of a bad headspace is you. Focus on yourself and surround yourself with people who truly care. It gets better once you leave.